Welcome in. Thanks so much for joining me. I'd like to discuss the power of intention or motivation in meditation practice today. This is a subject you usually find in more lineage-based or traditional Buddhism. As in lineage-based Buddhism or traditional Buddhism, we're often exploring the why either more or just as much as the how, meaning why we would want to meditate, what's it useful for, what are we actually, looking for, what can we get out of it in more subtle ways, as well as, of course, short-term, but also long-term subtle ways. So really what I've seen is it comes down to this thing called intention or motivation, which I'm now referring to as a process in and of itself. It's actually its own practice. And this will become a little clearer in a few moments for those of you newer to this idea. Normally in, I guess, modern Western culture, or just, the modern world, we think of intention or motivation as something innate or implicit. We think of it as, something we either have or we don't have, or it's very personal and I don't know, how do you say, like connected to our personality or identity. And we don't necessarily think about actually it's something that can be changed or cultivated in a positive way. In Buddhism, we start out our practice by understanding not only the means to meditate or practice, but actually why we would want to do it, like I was saying, what we want to get out of it, not only short-term, but mid-term and long-term. And this is something that I've seen needs to be informed, as some of it might be a little obvious, like, we might come to meditation or mindfulness with a feeling of lack or a feeling of struggle or stagnation or stuckness. And we just want to work with that. Or, we've heard meditation can relieve stress or provide some sense of calmness. And of course, this is a motivation. This is an intention. But what I found is through entering, more lineage-based Buddhism or traditional Buddhism, of course, lineage-based Buddhism, when you look at the life story of the Buddha, he wants us to be happy. He wants us to, find peace if we can and as much as we can. So I don't think it's a question of like whether, the lineage or the more traditional forms of Buddhism want us to feel calmer or less stressed or, more peaceful. It's more of a question of what is peace and what is going to actually lead us to that peace. So I think this is a fundamental question that has informed my practice of or process of cultivating intention or various intentions on the Buddhist path. It's really this question of, what does it really mean to be at peace? This is a big topic because it ends up going, down the rabbit hole of Buddhism pretty quickly, in the sense that there is an immediate teaching or an immediate implication, even within the Four Noble Truths, which are, foundational Buddhism, one of the first teaching of the Buddha. And the implication is that we are having a kind of miscommunication or misperception of our reality. And that misperception comes down to a very stiff and solid viewing and interpretation of subject-object, meaning me, mine, self, and I, and other. And other just doesn't mean other people. It also just means other, like the tree outside or the window or the door or that there is an outside. So this fundamental kind of confusion is pointed out first. And therefore it's pointed out first, it's not pointed out as explicitly as that necessarily. It's pointed out in the form of what we call dukkha. And this is a Pali and Sanskrit word that is very difficult to translate because it usually gets translated as dissatisfaction or suffering or pain. Sometimes it can be translated as confusion. But I think there's not a singular word, so it has to be opened up. But basically, dukkha is our experience of life in this type of misperception that's not allowing us to be at peace. And then, of course, through that, we have to work with our own interpretations, our own ideas of what peace means to us. And what I'm pointing out here is our intention or motivation, it's not what peace means to us. It's actually something we need to explore, whether we're having a clear and accurate understanding of what genuine, lasting peace is, or whether we're a little bit confused about that. So what I find in the practice of, our process of cultivating a motivation for meditation or intentions for meditation, the first step is just humility, just a sense of, I don't have it all figured out. I struggle with life. I hit walls. I get stuck. I get overwhelmed by my emotions. I get overwhelmed by thinking and thoughts. And of course, I get overwhelmed in communication with others in the world. And, not only confusion, but stress around that. So that's not a bad thing in and of itself, meaning like there's nothing wrong with you or me for that experience. And so we can have humility in that. I think that's also part of this first noble truth, what we call the first noble truth of dukkha. It's not to point out that life is suffering and there's nothing we can do about it. It's to point out that there's a fundamental confusion happening internally with our life, and that is the kind of ailment we need to treat with meditation and the Dharma. And that's not to then criticize you or me. That's actually to help us to develop not only some humility in working with our experience, and it's an experience we have in common with all beings, but it's also to develop compassion for that experience. So compassion comes in here in subtle ways, and then of course when it's explicitly named through the Sanskrit word karuna or in some other form, then we work with it explicitly. But it actually comes in the very first teaching of the Buddha, the first noble truth, because when dukkha is pointed out that stress is a part of life, dissatisfaction, suffering is a part of life, and there's a fundamental confusion happening as to why that stress happens. When that's pointed out, there's a softness that can start to take place, especially when we actually take that teaching to heart and work with it, contemplate it. Of course, work with meditation to try to see it directly in meditation and work with it. There's an implicit softening to the hardness around, I know what to do. I have all the answers. I don't know, like whatever our typical ways of hardening up and constricting to get through our day or through our week or through life, we can start to see, I don't have all the answers. And not only do I need some help, there's actually ways I can start to work with myself through the Dharma, through practices of motivation and intention, and then of course meditation, that can help me to soften to life. And soften to life doesn't mean we're less capable of dealing with it. I think it actually makes us more capable because there's more smoothness, fluidity in working with the dukkha that is inevitable, the pain, dissatisfaction, stress that is inevitable in our life. So I'm pointing this out merely to start to describe, just one way to describe it, there's many ways, the why. And then that why becomes part of our motivation, that I want to understand the nature of my dukkha on grosser and subtler levels. And I want to start to unwind or unbind myself from the confusion that keeps me locked into that dukkha. So that's really one of the core motivations on the Buddhist path. I think without it, there's not really a way to develop the more profound motivations we often call, we relate to the Sanskrit term bodhicitta, which we can translate as awakened mind. Without just first grappling with our own life and our own struggles and confusion in sort of repeating similar behaviors again and again and getting the same outcome, or, we make a little bit of progress, but that progress doesn't last because we're not looking at the fundamental disconnect or miscommunication with life. When we start to have that insight through studying the Dharma, learning about the Dharma, reflecting on it, and then putting that into meditation through the practices of shamatha or meditative awareness practice and vipassana or insight meditation practices. Through that, we then actually can start to develop this wish for all beings to be free, from that same fundamental dissatisfaction, that same fundamental confusion. And then we can start to bring in the practices of bodhicitta, the minds of awakening, first conceptually and then eventually more non-conceptually, into our motivation practice. So typically, we could say, if we really look at the lineages of Buddhism, they have a few different kinds of motivations that we would call like more liberative motivations, or motivations that are going to benefit us more long term. I named one of them, but actually there's one that comes right before that, which is actually just thinking about mind, and that mind is a continuation. So we're not always focused on, what's going to make me happy right now, what's going to relieve my pain right now. And instead we start to focus on the future a little bit. So we're a little bit more future minded in that we work with our emotions, thoughts, conduct, our ways of communication, and how we conduct ourselves with others and the world around us. We work with that in order to free up our future mind. And I guess we could say the future experiences of others as well. And that would be kind of embedded in not quite a liberative motivation, but something more fruitful than just worrying about this moment and being obsessed with, what do I do now? Because it's not like there's something wrong with us for trying to feel better now. It's that sort of habit to feel better now, or I should say only feel better now, or mostly, it keeps us on the hamster wheel. So there's just now, but we're not going anywhere. We're just spinning around, right? I think a lot of you can relate to this. I can. So that's the first type of motivation, looking towards the future. In traditional Buddhism, because they believe the mind is a continuum, and that it isn't the same as the body. This would include, our next incarnation when this body dies. So then the second type of motivation I already mentioned, which is a motivation of seeing the more underlying causes of dukkha, mainly this confusion around subject-object, or the subject of self and the object of other or thing or phenomena. And we work to remedy that because we want to be liberated from the fundamental confusion of what we could say, some people say ignorance. In Tibetan, we call it marikpa. In Sanskrit, avidya. It's basically a misperception, a miscommunication happening. And this runs very deep, all the way from our physical sense perceptions down to the ways we interpret things through our thoughts and judging mind. So a little too much to get into here, but nonetheless, I'm just hoping to inspire some of you that this is new to then, take up some Buddhist studies on this. If you've already been doing this and you're familiar, I hope this inspires you to go deeper as well, and to start to refine and expand your practice of intention or motivation before you meditate. But anyway, so that would be the second type, this wish for liberation. The third type I mentioned related to this term bodhicitta, or the mind of awakening. And of course, you can see that's based on the first two. First, there has to be an ability to see, hey, if I'm always chasing feel-good moments, I'm not going to look past that, and I'm going to remain on this hamster wheel. And then we look, why am I on the hamster wheel? What's that all about? What's the fundamental confusion that's keeping me there? And then we wish for some kind of liberation from that confusion. And then from there, as we're working with that, we start to see, hey, I'm not the only one here. I'm not the only one stuck here. And we start to develop a very soft and genuine heart of altruism towards others, that we want to work on our path of meditation, not just for ourselves alone, but for the benefit of others. And not just for temporary benefit only, but for the ultimate benefit of, if we're able to free ourselves, we become an example for others. Not in that we have to be somebody or do anything or write a book or any of that stuff. It's just because we become free, it's like there's something unique, there's something different. And that starts to affect others. And then, of course, the way we speak, the way we engage with others is going to be beneficial towards them. Again, we often like to think, how do I do that? Actually, I think it's kind of impossible to think, how do I do that? We just need to transform, and it will naturally happen. And we transform through also reflecting on the other two types of motivations, but of course, including them in the third. That's what we often do in the Mahayana Buddhist lineages. So This is just a quick overview of different kinds of Buddhist motivations you can develop. And as I said, these are practices in and of themselves. There's something what we usually do for those of us who are traditional or lineage-based Buddhist practitioners. We actually start our meditation session with contemplation or reflection on whatever dharma we know in the realm of these types of motivations, especially bodhicitta in the Mahayana traditions. We might work with practices of equanimity and loving kindness, limitless compassion, limitless joy, and start to open that and then start to develop this mind of altruism, or this sense of intention that our practice is not for ourselves alone, but really to be of benefit as we transform and once we're transformed fully. So this is something we start with a concept on, and something we think about and churn, and then we move to an embodiment or an embodied sense of that. That takes time, right? So that's what I meant, that motivation or intention in the Buddhist traditions, it's a practice in and of itself. There's also another way to look at this, which is that as we tame the mind through meditation, we're also going to be able to develop and enhance and or go deeper into the processes of these motivations. Because as we tame the mind and through meditation, we can start to see that these motivations are possible, and we can start to taste that we can transform. And through that taste, it inspires us, and the motivation actually becomes real. It doesn't just stay as a concept. So either way is fine. But usually in most forms of Buddhism in the world, we do combine some elements of what we call the three wheels, which are learning or listening to the Dharma, reflecting or contemplating on the Dharma, and then meditating on the Dharma. Right. So these three kind of go together, not necessarily in one session, but they go together in one day, or, however we want to organize that, right? That we're including some listening, some reflection to start to have confidence in what we've listened to or heard or read in the Dharma. And then we actually put that into practice in meditation. So I hope this has been helpful. It's just an introduction to something I'm pretty passionate about, which is really exploring the why we meditate, because I think often we spend so much time on the how, and then the how can almost become its own hamster wheel in itself, right? I'm not saying always, but I've seen that happen to people, myself included. So if this is helpful, please let me know. I always appreciate your feedback. Of course, if you want to know more about the why, there's so much out there, right? So I'm happy to point you in a good direction, depending on what you're looking for. And of course, you're welcome to check out different education materials I have on my website at scotttusa.com, if you want to reach out for more mentoring or help. So thanks so much, everyone. I hope this can benefit your practice. See you soon. Thanks.